happiness, that bliss, that validation, that belonging, that peace, that prosperity that we're seeking, that we are so convinced is out there. He's saying so matter-of-factly, is the illusion of all illusions. It is not out there. We back, philosophy players and playettes, talking dat Vedonka on the Daily Vedantic, the only philosophy podcast that I host that releases podcast episodes daily. I actually host another philosophy podcast called Yoga for Your Intellect. Same philosophy. Invite to Vedanta all day, baby. But I host that long-form conversational podcast with my teacher, Joseph. Highly recommend the long-form conversational nature of those episodes. It's kind of like the sports talk of ancient philosophy. It's primarily, there is wisdom shared. I learned so much. It's basically my weekly conversations with Joseph that we record for podcast episodes. So I learned so much. It is so cool to see the growing audience, especially here in SoCal, but also around the world, of people writing in. And every once in a while, a clip will go viral on that podcast. And it's remarkable how we can reach people from around the world with just recording these things and putting them up online. But but outside of the knowledge bombs here and there, it's just two individuals pursuing a philosophical approach to life, chopping it up, laughing, or chopping it up and working through some of these concepts typically from a Western angle, because we're both from Texas, and this philosophy was not our culture growing up. In some ways that's great. In some ways that's a little bit of a disadvantage. But ultimately, if you find value in these concepts and you find yourself wrapping your head around them, really enjoying them, and your family did not grow up talking about these concepts, then you really know you're doing it for the right reasons versus like, oh, I'm doing this for a social pat on the back because my grandparents wanted me to. That's the one advantage, many disadvantages of having no real community around this philosophy, and hence started this philosophy, and hence started this podcast project to build the digital version of that, where people can, and hence started these podcast projects to build the digital version of that type of community, and here the Venice Vedanta Club, the physical version of that kind of satsang, of that type of philosophical community that I did not have for the first decade of studying this philosophy. But I say sports radio because it's us just chumming it up. And this podcast project is just the daily version of that, 10, 15 minutes on these philosophical insights, like the one I've been thinking about the last few days, since the last maybe 2 Venice Vedanta clubs ago. So 2 weeks ago. But think about it for 2 weeks, and that is this. One of the best lectures on this philosophy that I ever heard was at the ashram in India, and it was during a youth afternoon, inviting teenagers into the ashram for an afternoon on some Saturday. And there was a lecture that was planned for this youth afternoon retreat. And it was from essentially the COO of the ashram, Dr. Jal, who's also the doctor, one of the doctors of the ashram, and Dr. J, as I call him. Shout out Dr. J. I hope you hear this. I was thinking this is going to be fun to just see how Dr. J talks about this ancient philosophy with some very subtle points, how he talks about it for teenagers. And I was like, yeah, it'll be entertaining, but probably an elementary approach. And good Lord, was I wrong about it being just a lecture for teenagers. Within 5 minutes, the words that he spoke have been ringing in my head since, I guess it was about 4 or 5 years ago. And he said this: whatever you take away from the next hour, let it be this: it's not out there. I still get chills when I think about how he said that in the first few minutes of this lecture. Touched on it throughout the lecture and then into the lecture. Same way of, if you take anything away from this past hour, let it be this: it's not out there. happiness, that bliss, that validation, that belonging, that peace, that prosperity that we're seeking, that we are so convinced is out there. He is saying so matter-of-factly, is the illusion of all illusions. It is not out there. Nothing we're seeking is out there, according to this philosophy, take it or leave it. Everything we are seeking, everything, is a state, is a condition, is an arrival, is an alignment to what is within. This came up in Venice Vedanta Club 2 weeks ago, where someone was saying that, I find myself thinking about this philosophy even when I'm waiting in line at the grocery store, when I'm trying to remind myself, be present, instead of just impatiently waiting, trying to get to the next thing and the next thing. And what I found so interesting and in parallel to this message of it's not out there is that almost as powerful of a message of it's out there. When I get to that milestone, that financial milestone, that career milestone, when I get married, when I have kids, when I get the validation of my father finally, when I show all of those people back in high school that I did it and they underappreciate all of these out there moments, so often are also out then. Not just spatially outside of ourselves, but also temporally. That's in 5 minutes. I'll be happy once I'm done with this line, once I'm out of this traffic. But how many times have you sat in traffic and then got where you wanted to go? How many times have you waited for that thing to arrive in the mail? You got that thing in the mail. How many times have you waited for that milestone to come and it passes you by? You get that thing that you swore was going to make you happy. Dozens, maybe hundreds of times, maybe thousands of times in your life. You get to those moments and they don't have that permanent happiness that you swore it was going to have. What was interesting about this thought of being, and it was under the language of being more present, is that even in that wait, one way of thinking about it is, I can cultivate more presence in that wait, grocery store. Another way of thinking about it is always here. That wait in the grocery store isn't just something to, in a disciplined way, trudge through of like, this is a place to practice austerity, patience. Pati, root of patience is to suffer, to something to suffer through. Or an opportunity to practice presence. A reorientation that might be even more helpful is, it's here. It's not out then. 5 minutes when the line is done, or 10 years when you make partner. It's not out then. It's here. It's now. Always. Similar to that illusion of it's out there is this illusion of, I feel it, but I got to make this one new move or get this one promotion. Then I can afford the house that we're under mortgage for that was a little bit outside of our means. And then I'll be able to really dive deep into a spiritual path. Well, once we get past, the baby's 2 months, it's a little bit crazy right now, but once we get past it, then I'll be able to dive in. Once I get out of this really tough relationship, then I'll be able to dive. Everything we are seeking is here, now. That 5 minutes, 10 minutes in that line at the grocery store, 30 minutes in traffic. What if you just entertain the thought of, maybe this is the wellspring? Even here is the wellspring to everything that I've searched for. Doesn't take but 30 seconds to imagine sitting quietly, reflecting, even in the midst of traffic. You're still sitting quietly or to your own music. Stopping and reflecting, pausing, taking it all in, even in the midst of a grocery line. Even in the midst of a 6-month-old screaming her head off. It was an interesting conversation and one that I've thought about for the last few weeks. Perhaps it's not just not out there, but it's just as delusional, distracting to think it's out then. Because what this philosophy says is quite explicit. It is here, now, within, whatever our here and now might be. That is today's reflection on the Daily Vedantic. We'll see you next time.